Hey there, humans and robots of YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. Park Melton here. As you see in the title, today we're going to talk about the 10 best breakup albums of all time. So, breaking up is never easy. Sometimes, as soon as you get done with it, you're filled with regret. Sometimes it's just unadulterated sadness. Sometimes you get that special kind of relief that comes from a breakup where finally got it off my chest, it's over, I can move on. As far as music is concerned, it can help you through a breakup in a couple of different ways. It's nice to know that other people have gone through the same thing that you've gone through. It's nice to know that the anger or the depression or whatever emotions you may be feeling, it's a human thing. It's relatable, and other people have been there, and they found a way to express it and put it into music, and now it's out there for you to listen to so that you can understand that you're not alone in what you're going through. Sometimes, music may result in you sort of dwelling on your emotions, and sometimes it kind of helps you get your feet back underneath you and helps you to move on. And there are albums of both varieties on this list. I do feel obligated to mention that this list is curated specifically to me. Whatever music you listen to when you break up might not even coincide with mine in any way, shape, or form. Most of these albums deal a lot with heartbreak. Some people want to listen to music that is very different from that when they go through a breakup because they don't want to think about it at all, which is totally valid and acceptable, but that's not what comprised my list. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and do it. This is a ranked list. Number 10 is Red by Taylor Swift. This album came out in 2012. I'm not the biggest Taylor Swift fan in the world, but I can't deny that this album fully encapsulates what it's like at the end of a messy breakup. Sometimes you have somewhat mixed feelings. Sometimes you have that relief. This album kind of captures both of those elements. Some people present this album as a country album. I think that this is the album where Taylor Swift completely leaves that aspect of herself behind. There are very light country elements, but personally, this is a straight-up pop album, in my opinion. Really good album, especially, as far as kind of a breath of fresh air to the pop genre at the time. Really appreciate it. Next is number 9. I have Volume 1 by She and Him. This came out in 2008. She and Him is a duo made up of Zooey Deschanel and M. Ward. They came together on a movie set. Zooey Deschanel kind of uses She and Him as a platform to put out music that she's been writing basically her whole life. This first album from them is my favorite from them. There's a lot of, a little bit of naivety, I wouldn't say a lot. As far as a first effort is concerned, I think it's really solid. There's a couple of good covers on it. There's some very tender moments on it. As far as a breakup album is concerned, it's probably not as in your face as some of the other albums on this list, but sometimes, it feels good to be in a sort of subdued mood, and, this album kind of holds your hand through a breakup, it doesn't throw it in your face, so for that reason I appreciate it a lot. This next album is a big contrast from the last one. Number 8, The Origin of the Feces by Typo Negative. This came out in 1992. This album is very aggressive. It's very hilarious. It's a little bit more punk than some of Typo Negative's later stuff, when they would lean more towards the gothic end of the spectrum. It's a little thrashy. It's honestly a very funny album also. There's a lot of stuff that was sort of added after the fact. All of the applause and stuff, that's all artificial. That's studio tracking. And there's, cutaways and stuff like that. If you're the person who wants to sit there and be angry after a breakup, this is probably going to be the best album on the list for that purpose. It's a very aggressive, wonderful album. Next is number 7, Minstrel in the Gallery by Jethro Tull. This came out in 1975. This album, Ian Anderson says that, this album can't really be considered autobiographical. He says that his writing style has always consisted of, you draw on real world experience, and then you sort of apply the sort of fantastic element to it. And this album captures that really well. It did come in the wake of Ian Anderson's split with his wife, so calling it a breakup album may be a little bit disingenuous to Ian Anderson's intention, but as is typical with Jethro Tull, this album has sort of a overlying concept or theme to it. This one actually, like some of their other albums, actually has a dual theme. It deals with the heartbreak, and then it also deals with the sort of perspective of audience to performer and performer to audience. In the way that you can apply that to a relationship, sometimes you're sort of playing a part in your relationship. You are unable to be genuine. And this album touches on that in a sort of abstract sense. I really appreciate it. I'm married now. Ultimately, the goal of marriage is to never have to go through another breakup. We're doing good so far. But I've had my share, both dumping and being dumped. And when I got dumped in the worst way, this album was there for me in a big way. And I've always had a real strong appreciation for it. Next is number 6, God Loves Ugly by Atmosphere. This album came out in 2002. This album is definitely pretty aggressive for a hip-hop album. It's their sophomore effort. There's a lot of that sort of bravado that you would expect from an early album from a hip-hop group. But it's coupled with some genuinely intimate moments. There is a lot of anger on this album, but there's also a little bit of tenderness. And the way that it comes together on the album, I think, is really impressive. Atmosphere is my personal favorite hip-hop group, and their ability to blend the intimacy, the sort of authenticity of Slug's lyricism, and that with the sort of aggression and in-your-face attitude that, is sort of a staple of hip-hop. Their ability to blend that is really effective, in my opinion, and is what puts Atmosphere at the top of my list for hip-hop. And this album is right up there with their best albums. Definitely worth a listen if you are exploring hip-hop, because Atmosphere doesn't really sound like anybody else, in my personal opinion. Next is number 5, Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette. This came out in 1995. This was a big departure from Alanis' first 2 albums. Much harder edge to it. This album is sort of anthemic for what I would consider girl power. As a cisgendered man, maybe not really fair for me to have an opinion on girl power, but I think it's pretty universally accepted that Jagged Little Pill says what a lot of women want to say in the wake of a breakup, and like some of the other albums, the aggression is mingled in with a little bit of tenderness, but I think, the first time I heard You Oughta Know, I was like, wow, I hope to never be on the receiving end of that kind of aggression, whether due to a breakup or otherwise. But absolutely amazing album, very commercially successful for good reason. All the singles on it are amazing. Just a really solid record. Number 4 is Sea Change by Beck. This came out in 2002. When I listened to this album for the first time, it was really hard for me to make it through because I felt the vulnerability that's expressed on this album. It's very humanizing. You can tell that Beck was definitely going through a lot emotionally when this album came out. It came out in the wake of his split with his longtime partner. I think they were together for 9 years or so. It's a very long relationship by my standards. So, the sort of emotional outpouring on this album, with a little bit of the backstory, it makes a lot of sense. It's another album that's a big departure from the artist's previous work. Beck kind of stayed in that alternative folk realm. This album is a lot more what you might call singer-songwritery. It's very, very well produced, but the lyrics is what really drives the album home for me personally. Like I said, it's a vulnerability thing. I can relate to a lot of what Beck says on this album, and it's an emotional ride. Number 3 is The Moon and Antarctica by Modest Mouse. This album came out in 2000. This album helped me through a lot of hard times. The first half of it is maybe my favorite first half of any album, which is a pretty bold statement, but, it's the emotional connection. I've listened to it in the wake of every major breakup in my life. This album has really been... Isaac Brock has been through exactly what I've been through, and if he hasn't, then he's definitely a great pretender. Because the emotion on the Moon and Antarctica, it's, I felt it, I've been there. And it's nice to know that I'm not the only one that's been there. Number 2, Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan. This came out in 1975. Pretty big album for Bob Dylan, very commercially successful for him. This one's interesting because Bob Dylan stated vehemently that the songs on the album are not autobiographical, even though it came at the time that he became estranged from his wife Sarah. Jacob Dylan, his son, frontman for the Wallflowers, he said that when he listens to Blood on the Tracks, he hears his parents talking, which, I think it's indicative that whether or not Bob Dylan wants to admit that it's autobiographical, it definitely draws from his personal experience in a big way. This album, I think, it's definitely in my top 3 favorite Bob Dylan albums. It's the songwriting is amazing. I think that the sort of blend of the polished production alongside tracks that are a little bit more rudimentary, I think it's a really good sound for Bob Dylan. His voice on it is amazing, maybe vocally one of his best albums, if not the best, in my personal opinion. This album, every song on it's amazing. I think Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts is kind of the odd one out on the album. I feel like it could have been on a different album, and Blood on the Tracks might flow a little bit better. Not to say that it's not a good song, I just think as far as the emotional outpouring that comprises most of the album, it's kind of it doesn't feel like it belongs necessarily. If You See Her Say Hello, just an absolutely beautiful, heart-wrenching, just emotionally jarring song for me personally. Whole album is amazing. As a quick segue, I do want to say, if you're the sort of person who likes to sit down with a case of beer and deal with your breakup in that way, wouldn't personally recommend, but to each their own. Bob Dylan's album, Good As I've Been to You, I think it came out in 1993. That album is very effective for that purpose. It's all covers, but the composition of the album is very bare bones, just Bob, his guitar, and some harmonica on occasion. A lot of the songs deal with heartbreak and that sort of thing. The very first song, Frankie and Albert, it's about murdering your cheating husband, so can't go wrong with that, right? So just as a quick segue, if you like Bob Dylan and you like breakup albums, you might check out that one as well. Didn't make the cut for this particular list, but still worth mentioning. I do have one honorable mention before I get to number 1. So honorable mention is Lateralis by the band Tool. I'm a big Tool fan. Lateralis isn't a breakup album per se, but it is definitely a moving on, self-discovery sort of album, and for that reason it's helped me through some breakups, but I don't consider it a breakup album by nature, so do with that what you will. Great album if you're into, that kind of thing. I know there are a lot of people that don't like Tool, that's totally fine, but it's a great album. And the number 1 is probably no big surprise to people who know me in the real world, Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. This album came out in 1977. This is the breakup album of all breakup albums, in my opinion. Christine and John McVie splitting up, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks splitting up, lots of emotions flying high, a lot of cocaine in the studio. This album has everything somebody like me would look for in a breakup album. There's songs that are very tender, and maybe even wistful, you might say, and then there are songs that are very scathing. There are songs that are look at what we could have had, and there are songs that I hope I never see you again. There are songs that say we need to do everything we can to make this work, and there are songs that say there's literally nothing you can do that can keep us together. It's got the whole gamut of emotions that I think are, pretty human as far as what you might feel in the wake of a breakup. I think everybody in the band is in top form. I don't know that I would say that Rumors, it's hard to not say that it's Fleetwood Mac's best album, but it's definitely their most successful, and for a good reason. The production on this album is just astonishing. The lyrics all feel very heartfelt. Lindsey Buckingham, sort of taking a bigger role in the studio on Rumors, and you can hear it. The album sounds very polished. That's my list. I would love to know what some of your favorite breakup albums are. I know there's quite a few that I milled around before I settled on my 10 or 11 if you want to count Lateralis. Like, for example, Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears. That's a good breakup album for me personally. Or Mama Said by Lenny Kravitz, another good album for a breakup. But, keeping the list to 10 has proved a big challenge for me, but this is my ranked list. I'd love to see what you might put on yours. If you want to give me the whole 10, that's awesome. If you want to just tell me your favorite, that's cool too. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.